Coming up, how do you, the average investor, protect what you've got in these uncertain economic times? Stay tuned. We'll take a look at smart, practical steps that you can do to minimize the damage to your life savings. Now, tonight, I think you can turn on 100 different news channels, and everybody's talking about the politics. I swear to you, if I hear one more person, wait, you know what? Where's John McCain? Where is Barack Obama on this? This is the country they're supposed to lead. Where the hell are they on this? Why aren't they out there leading and pushing for what they believe is the right thing? I'll tell you where they are. Nowhere, because they don't want to be on the record. Everybody's talking about the politics and the bailout and the golden parachutes and the losses in the stock market and blah, 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 blah. Can I ask you an honest question? Is anybody talking to you? Have you related to anybody on television? Is anybody saying and talking about the things that you're concerned about? You know, I've got 4 kids. I got 2 of them. They're going to be in college next year. Are you going to be able to get a loan for your kids to go to college? I mean, are you going to even be able to afford the stupid books that they're charging $7,000 for? How safe is your job? How about the ability to pay for your family to be able to support them? You know, we've all seen pictures of the Great Depression, you know, in the books. Oh, look, there's the guys in the bread line. We saw that in school. But what we're staring down at now is real life. They say a depression could come. Great. What does that mean? I mean, because it's not a textbook. This is actually happening. So don't talk to me about a price of a barrel of oil. Talk to me about the price of a gallon of gasoline. Don't talk to me about wheat futures. Talk to me about what a price for a loaf of bread is going to be next year. Forget about the housing market. Am I going to be able to keep a roof over my family's head? If I lose my job, am I going to even be able to sell my house? What will America look like in the next 12 to 24 months? I think that's what America wants to know. Peter Schiff is the president of Europac and author of Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And Bob O'Brien is the stocks editor for Barron's Online. Bob, let me start with you. 1929 depression. I know, again, what it looks like in the textbooks. If that would happen, what does that mean?
Well, you know, Glenn, contrary to any popular belief out there, I didn't personally experience the 1929 depression, so right. I'm doing this from the textbooks as well as you are. You know, the one thing that strikes me is, honestly, we're so far away from those 1929 levels right now that the comparisons with the depression really perhaps overstated. However, we're clearly on some kind of a slippery slope here where the credit markets have completely tightened up. You're not able to refinance your home. It's going to become increasingly difficult to do things with credit card. It's going to become increasingly difficult to get those student loans you want to put your 2 kids through college next year, as well as things like an auto loan if you want to do. And this is a function of what Wall Street has done to get us into this disastrous condition. And what it means is that credit has completely dried up. There's simply no lending. Banks aren't lending to banks. Banks aren't lending to businesses. And banks aren't lending to you and me. Right. And credit is the lifeblood of this economy.
All right, Peter, I have had a conversation with a guy who has spent time working on, you know, some of the deals that are going on to try to save some of these things. He's been in the room with Hank, as he calls him. He says in the next 12 to 15 months, he sees the GDP falling 10 to 15%. I asked a billionaire friend of mine this weekend. I was at a charity thing. I said, what does that mean? What does that even look like? He said, I don't even think that's ever happened before. What is 10 to 15% drop in the GDP? What would that mean?
It's huge, but it's exactly what I wrote would happen in my book. I mean, with the problems that we have now, you know, Paulson is saying it's all these bad mortgages on the books of all the banks. That's not the problem. The problem is, why are they bad? They're bad because Americans are broke. We've simply borrowed too much money and we can't pay it back. And that's because of years of horrific monetary policy and a government that championed us every step of the way. Every time we bought a car with borrowed money, bought a house, every time we used our credit cards and spent money, they were applauding us. And every time we tried to save a little bit, they tried to stimulate us some more. So that's the problem. The reason the credit markets are shutting down is because we've blown all the money. We can't borrow money to buy new cars. We can't even afford to pay back the money for the cars we've already bought. You know, as far as college tuitions, one of the benefits of this is the fact that since we can't borrow money to send our kids to school, college tuitions are going to be the one thing that's going to plunge in this country, and you won't need to borrow money because it'll be cheap to send your kids to college.
What I want to know, though, Peter, or Bob, I'd like to hear from both of you guys. Work this out together here on the fly. What does it mean? If it was a 15% drop in, or let's say 10% drop in GDP, What is the unemployment rate like? What is GE or GM still in business? What does that mean?
This is all going to mean a reduction in our standard of living. Remember, our phony GDP was made up of consumption. 72% of our GNP was Americans borrowing money from the Chinese and the Japanese and the Saudis and buying imported products that we can't afford. So all that's going to go away. And Americans are going to have to get used to a lower standard of living where we don't consume as much and we don't borrow as much. We work a lot harder and we save our money. The problem is the government is trying to interfere with this process. The government is trying to pretend that they can just print up some money and make these problems go away. They can't. They can certainly make them a lot worse, though.
Bob, can you help me? What happens to the Defense Department? What happens to, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, you're gonna have a drop in GDP. What happens to what we know?
Well, basically, we become Japan in the 1980s, effectively an economy with 0% growth where you have to take interest rates down to 0%, and we still can't get a loan for anything. The big difference between, and that was a decade-long decline in their economy. It reduced the standard of living in Japan. It reduced the effectiveness of just about everything they were able to do as a global presence. The difference between Japan and them, which goes to one of the points that Peter's making, Japan and ourselves, which goes to one of the points Peter's making, is that Asians typically, and I'm trying not to, you know, I'm not doing this as some sort of a racial stereotype. This is a fact on the books. Asian societies have more of a tradition of saving, where they typically put 20 or 25% of their net worth in plain old vanilla bank accounts.
We used to have that tradition ourselves, you know, but that was screwed up by monetary policy, by Alan Greenspan, and by the government. But we're not going to be Japan. We're going to be Argentina. We're going to be Zimbabwe. We're not going to be as lucky as Japan.
Let me say something. I'll make a racial stereotype. I don't think it has anything to do with their race. Asians also are kicking our ass. And you know why they're kicking our ass? Because they never play the victim card. They come, they work hard, they study hard, they do the right thing, they save their money, they take care of their family. That is a stereotype, you betcha. Has nothing to do with their race. It has something to do with their values. And that's what we've lost in this country.
It has to do with government. You know, we used to kick their asses when we had small government, sound money, and less intervention. The reason they're beating us is because we have more government than they do. We have a bigger obstacle to overcome.
But we have a bigger government because we don't have values anymore. Our values are stuff. I want stuff. I want it now. You got to help me. I got to live like that guy. How come that guy's doing better than me?
There's nothing wrong with wanting stuff. Unfortunately, the government made it very easy for us to borrow money and get stuff instead of work hard and save our money so that we can buy things we can actually afford. And that's what we have to get back to in this country. We have to have a real economy. We just can't keep borrowing money from the rest of the world. And you're talking about our military. Yeah, our entire empire is going to come collapsing around us. We can't afford to keep these troops all around the world if our money isn't worth anything. How are we going to pay to sustain the troops, to supply them?
And even more pernicious, Glenn, you know, what the government is doing with this initiative, with this bailout plan, which has apparently failed under its current form, but they're going to go back there and try again. You know, for years, the Fed tried to simply conflate the money supply issue, pump more money out there to try and keep things artificially supported. They ran out of that. That tactic stopped working sometime in the last several months. So now, instead of simply trying to affect the quantity of money that's out there, they're trying to engineer the price of that money. This bailout package is a completely different tack. This isn't simply the Fed just pumping money into the system. This is the Fed doing something. This is the federal government doing something much more pernicious, much more untested, and perhaps a lot more debilitating.
And I have to tell you both, if you read Amity Schle's book, The Forgotten Man, that is exactly why the Depression lasted as long as it did, is because they were trying new things out. Guys, thanks a lot. We'll talk again. Coming up, how does the average investor protect their savings in retirement through these kinds of economic times? We'll look at some practical steps to minimize the damage to your bottom line next.